We forgot what it's like to eat real food. We forgot what it's like to watch a human being be born and then die. Microdosing psilocybin would be very effective for many people. I felt this overwhelming feeling of clarity because of the disassociative state.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Good Trip Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Pella. You already know this is a limited series of conversations with incredible people from the fields of entertainment, medicine, business, and beyond, each with their own unique stories, perspectives, and experiences regarding psychedelics, psychedelic medicine, psychedelic therapy, personal use, and other amazing stories, of which this man, Dr. Gary Shlifer, has plenty. This is a good buddy of mine. He's a doctor and the founder of Evolve Healthcare out here in the greater Los Angeles area, specializing in preventative medicine. And he also has a very deep history with ketamine therapy. He's an advocate for ketamine therapy and knows just a whole lot, almost too much. I would say that Gary knows almost too much about this subject matter. It's awesome to sit down and talk with a guy who is trained through the entire Western medicine training philosophy and program, but has found a way to navigate his own medical practice outside of the maybe traditional doctrine of Western medicine. And he's doing that with Evolve. He's doing that with his stresses on nutrition, ancestral nutrition, and just how to be a Homo sapien according to what works best for your individual body. It's an incredible line of work, and I'm so happy to be connected to Gary and to hear all of the things that he's working on and what he believes in. He's got such a passion for his work. We did a deep dive into how he first got into psychedelics, how he started integrating psychedelics into his own personal practices, and how ketamine therapy and other forms of psychedelic therapy have had a very tangible, noticeable, nearly immediate positive impact on patients that he has interacted with directly. All that and so much more in this week's episode. But first, a super quick word from our sponsor, Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy. Now, this is a product that was created by Dr. Kirk Parsley, a former Navy SEAL, who's actually on an episode of the Good Trip podcast coming out soon. And during that show, we talked a bit about his experience working with fellow veterans to get them off of prescription pills and off of sleeping pills that are so damaging to your body. And it really inspired him to create Sleep Remedy, which is a blend of different ingredients like magnesium, 5-HTP, L-tryptophan, and melatonin, all of which are meant to combine and mimic your body's natural progression into sleep. So if you have trouble sleeping at night, falling asleep, relaxing into sleep, or if you wake up feeling not fully energized and refreshed from a good night's sleep, I highly recommend checking out docparsley.com/Brent to get a discount on Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy, which comes as either tea that you can have before bed or capsules if you're not into drinking liquids before bed. And I highly recommend it. I had a great night's sleep last night. You can tell because of how much I'm smiling right now. Do you see the smile? That's a good smile, baby. That's a good sleep smile. And that came from Doc Parsley's Sleep Remedy, which I have had such a good time integrating into my overall wellness routine. So again, docparsley.com/Brent for a discount. The Good Trip Podcast also brought to you by Odyssey. Odyssey is a sparkling caffeinated beverage that I absolutely love. It comes in 4 flavors. It's got 85 milligrams of caffeine from green tea, and it's got 2,500 milligrams of mushrooms. Not magic mushrooms, but don't let that deter you, because these mushrooms are meant to sharpen your focus, your creative edge, and your ability to get through your day and accomplish all your tasks with clean, smooth energy, no jitters, no anxiety, none of that. You can trust me because I have at least one of these every day. Odyssey is a sparkling mushroom elixir that you can find on Amazon and online at odysseyelixir.com and in various stores across the country, Albertsons, CVS's, and a couple others. You can go to odysseyelixir.com. There's a store locator, and you can also order online from their website. Highly, highly recommend you check out Odyssey Elixir. It is delicious. practice. So without further ado, please enjoy this uninterrupted trip with my good buddy, Dr. Gary Shlifer.
What's up, brother?
Good to see you. You're like a Dr. Bro, dude.
Dr. Bro.
You're like Dr. Bro, dude.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever called you that?
I
like any of your patients?
I take that as the highest compliment.
Okay, cool. You should.
Yeah. I'm myself. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I'm a bro, but
in a good way.
in a good way, yeah. I think people are just a little too formal in medicine, and I think people need to be a little more relaxed. That's my approach. It seems to be more palatable to people.
Did you have that thought when you were going through med school too? Would you look around and be like, damn, all these people have a stick up their ass?
No, I was just always myself, and everyone is just so conforming. Like training, the people they pick to become doctors, the whole thing, it's like forces you to conform to this like way of doing things.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's because they just want you to follow the rules.
Yeah.
That's not medicine. Medicine is an art. Everyone has to think for themselves. So I always did that. It was attractive to everyone except the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
The leadership liked me, but they were always like keep a distance sort of thing.
Yeah.
But then in private practice, it's been very useful because I think it's just it's just so different than most practices or most doctors, and it's attractive to people, you know.
Is that because you have more freedom in private practice to kind of operate however you want?
Yeah, I mean within limits.
Within limits, yeah.
I think some people take it too far where they just become like, I'm overall Western medicine and I have to just do this alternative stuff or whatever thing I'm really into, which is cool. I think the thing that I bring that's different is I really respect Western medicine. I love the training I got. I love all the information. I love evidence-based medicine and research and stuff, but you can't just take that and that's all you get. You know, you have to also integrate, psychedelic medicine and Eastern medicine and traditional practices that aren't technically Eastern medicine that were just lost to the generations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the trick. Like that's the real trick is embrace Western medicine, embrace everything else, and present something to your patient that's for them. Like really individual. It's very challenging. It's very hard. Like off air, we were just talking about how difficult it is to run a practice. It's incredibly overwhelming. But it's gratifying. It like feels really good. So yeah, I think it really works for me, but I don't think it would work for a lot of people. I had so much guidance from my parents who are, my mom is a physician and I ran my mom's office for many decades. And then his friends in their 50s and 60s were always mentoring me when I was first starting.
Your parents' friends?
Mm-hmm.
Did your parents practice medicine outside of the U.S. before coming out here?
My mom was a family doctor in Russia.
Okay.
And then she came here and became a podiatrist because at the time it was much easier. She had two small kids that immigrated to America like in her 30s. So she was able to go through podiatry school much easier.
Do you know anything about like the Eastern Europe? I guess, is Russia Eastern European? Yeah, it is Eastern Europe. Do you know if they have a similar approach to medicine that we do as far as like the strictness of thinking? Like, or do they encourage outside of the box thinking, and do they encourage practices within less traditional medicines like holistic wellness or
I don't think
preventative care? No,
I don't know for a fact. I don't think so. Their system is different. At least I only know what my mom went through, but basically you don't go to undergrad and then decide that you want to go to med school. Like you go to upper, post high school, you go to medical training, and it's like, that's what it is. There's no like liberal arts degree or like undergraduate in science. So my mom went straight to school, got trained, I think it was 6 years, and then they threw her in, and she was doing a combination of family practice and psychiatry.
Oh, wow.
Psychiatry, which it sounded all very traditional. And again, we're going to talk about psychedelics. Russia was quick to illegalize all of these drugs as well. As soon as American drug war started, all the rest of the countries followed in suit. Everyone made MDMA illegal and psilocybin illegal like a year after we did, sort of thing. Actually, a lot of great research came out of Russia. In ketamine specifically, they have obviously a history of alcohol issues. So there's some great research. I think it's from the 90s, looking at ketamine-assisted psychotherapy for alcohol abuse, and it was very effective. And it's
Wow.
like what really pushed me. When I saw those studies, I was like, wow, there's really something to this ketamine stuff. So yeah, I think Russia, not different. I can't imagine it would be very different. You know.
What were your parents' reaction when you started getting into ketamine therapy and like getting into psychedelics a little bit? Was it hard to tell them because they come from that type of background? I mean, Russia will lock up somebody for having a drop of weed oil in their backpack. So I can only imagine what, practice doctors
CBD
would be
oil.
like.
Yeah. My mom and dad are like any person who grew up, over the last 50 years was indoctrinated into the whole drug war concept that all of these illegal drugs are bad. So I'm now very open about the fact that I've used marijuana specifically throughout my life to just keep myself happy, keep an even mind, creativity. I use it like before a workout or a long run. It helps me get into a meditative state. Then as I went into medical school and residency, I always tried to, be a good boy and like not. And then it was always so challenging, and I watched everyone suffer, and I had a tool. Mm-hmm. Like I had a tool. It was built in. It was because I grew up in the Valley listening to Bob Marley and Sublime. And I always thought it was just something that I did, and I felt bad about it. And, like we were kids, like smoking in a car and all. My parents got mad at me a lot. But as I kind of grew up, especially going through medical training, I was watching all of my colleagues get depressed, get heavy, lose their motivation. And sure enough, they're on antidepressants or they're having real difficulties. And I had a tool. And so then as I got into residency, I was in the Midwest, and that's like very non-drug culture. And I tried it again, and I watched everyone, like intern year and internal medicine residency is brutal. Mm-hmm. It's brutal.
I've heard, yeah.
Like 36-hour calls every 3 days.
Isn't that bad? How is that right? Like, your body needs sleep. Anybody, I had Kirk Parsley on here, Dr. Sleep Remedy. Mm-hmm. Do you know who that is? Mm-hmm. So he broke everything down for me sleep-wise. And I was thinking while we were talking even, and now I'm thinking now, it's like, how could doctors make each other go 36 straight hours? Like, you should be at the forefront of knowing how that impacts your ability to operate, right? What is that?
I mean, it seems like an obvious thing. It's because this thing of lifestyle medicine, as lifestyle as a way to heal yourself and stay healthy, is not part of the Western medical system. Mm-hmm. And so it's not part of what we deliver. It's not part of what we do in our training. Lifestyle is not considered a medical treatment. Mm-hmm. And that's why I've latched onto it, because I'm like, oh my God, if I can just teach people how to cold plunge and how to meditate and how to exercise appropriately, you can cure and heal. And that's the goal, right? So no, I think that doctors are no different than the layman when it comes to lifestyle. And that's why, in fact, the mental health issues in medicine, especially like doctors, it's terrible, I brought up to you, and maybe you'll talk to her one day, Dr. Lita Fatemi. She worked in a major university, and she recently switched and is working on psychedelic medicine. And she actually is doing spots on NBC and trying to promote this idea. But her angle is physician wellness, because the rates of depression, burnout is what we call it. It's just depression and anxiety from a really difficult and unforgiving career. Mm-hmm. It's a real problem. Suicide rates with physicians are much higher than the population at whole. So she is trying to actually do what kind of you're suggesting is promote psychedelics and promote mindfulness to physicians, because there is none of that. So it was a badge of honor to stay up for 32 hours and do all the work, I can argue it both ways. So I could play devil's advocate. I can say that it's took years off my life. It was brutal and miserable. Perhaps there was some performance decrease at, hour 31 or whatever. Mm-hmm. But also, just to play with the other side, it makes what I do today very easy, because I can perform, really like in-depth medical analysis. I'm an internist, so I'm a thinker. I don't do procedures. I like analyze. I do differentials. I come up with treatment plans, whatever. I can do that with 10%. Like it's just so programmed. I've done it not 10,000, 100,000 times over and over in every condition. So there's a benefit to pushing yourself to the extreme and learning how to perform under that kind of pressure.
Yeah.
And I think that if residency is too easy, it's too cake, then when you get into a clinical situation where you're the provider and things get really hairy, like a pandemic hits and, everyone is struggling and you're not ready to perform under that pressure, perhaps something was missing from your training. So I would say maybe a 32 to 36 hour call is extreme. But being in the hospital overnight and seeing what it looks like when a patient gets admitted at 6 a.m.
You see the entire spectrum of what happens from beginning to end. Got you. Okay, your tool. Go back to your tool.
So, yeah, I mean, marijuana, I think, is just such a powerful tool. For me, it was life-changing, continues to be life-changing. And so, yeah, I promote. So the question was about my parents. My parents watched me go through this process and turn into a capable physician and like a nice person to people. And I have shared psychedelics and marijuana specifically with a lot of my friends. And so when a couple of my physician friends came who I had shared this with, we actually had gone to Burning Man together and had a magical experience. And the female physician, who is a bit older than me and like very esteemed physician, talked to my parents about it and was like, this Gary brought this to our lives and this has been like game changing for us. I saw the moment where they were having that conversation and the gears turned. That opened up, and that was like, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So that opened up the door to marijuana. And then they listened to my podcast and me ranting about all the stuff I rant about. And they have always been very questioning of the system because they left a communist country and were
right.
Like,
oh, yeah, that's true. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yes.
they already had some level of questioning authority and questioning systems.
Yeah,
in
like
general.
this whole like separation of people through COVID of like the blue pill or red pill, however you want to look at it. If you came from a communist country, like you're not blue pilled.
Right.
That like you watched the outcome of that. And that's not to say liberal or Republican. What I'm really saying is realizing that, these narratives, these stories, the fear mongering, it's not all true. There's part of it is true. Part of it is over, dramatized for clicks. Part of it is over dramatized for political dealings and things. So they were very lucid on it. And then, and then with like ketamine and MDMA and psilocybin, they opened up. And so, once I was already starting the ketamine program and once I was already, using marijuana to help people get off like addictive substances like benzos, they already kind of saw that was something that was there.
So you were you in a position to prescribe marijuana?
You don't need to prescribe marijuana. It's a
right.
recommendation.
It was a recommendation. So what? How exactly does marijuana help somebody with a benzo addiction? Because if that's kind of where I see your first step into
that was my first step.
The world of like plant medicines and psychedelic therapy, even though marijuana isn't it's psychoactive, I guess.
Or is it an entheogen? There's these questions of like what makes something really a psychedelic, right?
Yeah.
Is MDMA
it's
a psychedelic?
Different for everybody. Yeah.
I think it's these drugs. Oh, we're going all over the place, but it's drugs that don't fixate on your ego and on suppressing feelings, but rather drugs that open you up, drop your ego, and open up your feelings. So I think marijuana does that. All these other drugs do that. That's how I think about it as far as splitting it. And we can talk about, I think, where the Western medicine system struggles with it, because most of the drugs that are legal in America and most of the drugs that are prescribed are sedating, suppressive. They numb you. They don't let you feel your feelings more. They don't let you explore your consciousness. If anything, they suppress your consciousness. And like things like alcohol and cocaine, they build your ego. They make you feel more powerful, but it's not. It's fake. The healing, the transformation comes from dropping that, feeling very uncomfortable and weird, seeing and feeling things that are very abnormal, and letting go of the pretenses that we live in. So I do think marijuana falls into that category. As far as how it helps people with addiction, look, first of all, it's not physiologically addictive. So you can smoke marijuana and stop it and you don't get a withdrawal syndrome like benzodiazepines, like you can die if you just stop benzodiazepines and you're taking a high enough dose. You don't die if you stop smoking lots of weed. You just don't, because the physiology doesn't work like that. But I think most people are dealing with anxiety. They're dealing with difficult life situations at home, insomnia, these kind of things. And I think marijuana is a tool. It can really calm you down. It can change your perspective. You don't need a lot to really get yourself there. And because it's non-addictive, it's a great option for someone who's doing something that's very addictive and toxic. You could probably argue different ways, but I think it's pretty clear that the safety profile of marijuana compared to like an opiate or a benzo is dramatically better.
Yeah, it's incomparable.
We don't need to explain it to people.
Yeah.
Like, that's obvious, right?
How long ago was it when you first started recommending marijuana? What was that first step?
Pretty much like as soon as I opened Evolve.
Yeah.
I have a doctor-patient confidentiality. I don't put it in the chart. Sometimes I do. If it's like very, very beneficial and it's a big part of the treatment, I do. Some people like don't want that in their chart because they still feel like it's illegal federally or whatever. So
sure.
I kind of like just meet the people where they're at. But look, in California, marijuana is available on every corner in a really beautiful Apple.
Well,
store.
It's an essential business.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's that important. So I think what most people that are coming to me are not people our age. They're people a little bit older. Sorry.
Yeah.
They're people a little bit older that need guidance. Like, what kind of marijuana should I smoke? What's the formulation? A lot of older people that have never tried it, I like to give them something like a 5-to-1 or a 4-to-1 THC CBD vape pen. So they're not smoking the plant, which can feel weird.
Right.
And it's not such a high level of THC, so they can kind of ease into it. And they can get all these other benefits from the CBD component with a little bit of THC. That's like a great. So that's the kind of guidance I'll step them into. Sometimes it's just a conversation of like, hey, when I was younger, I smoked. Then I was like, it's bad. Now I would just want to try it because I don't want to drink alcohol every night. What do you think? And I'm like, man, maybe you should try an indica. It's a little more relaxing. Don't get a super potent one that's 32% THC. You're going to like overdo it. Let's start with something like 25% or less. So there's these little subtle things that actually the bud tenders talk about in a good marijuana dispensary. The bud tenders are talking about this stuff. But I think for a lot of people, they need to hear it from a physician. And I'm seeing more and more people, physicians opening up shops where they're like doing that. They're just guiding people through marijuana therapy. There's this one that really helps parents with kids who have everything from autism to seizure disorders to other cognitive problems that are guiding them on how to use THC and CBD. And I've seen some pretty amazing stuff. I don't deal with peds, so I'm not a great person to guide them, but I'm the guy who's like, yeah, you should definitely think about marijuana because you just tried 10 pharmaceuticals and all of them make your kid out of it and sedated and it's not better.
Yeah.
It's just different bad than the behavioral issues. So yeah, I think I try to just steer people and open people's minds to the marijuana. And I think it's like a very easy step in that psychedelic space. It's very, very safe.
Yeah, that's a nice step into it. So if that was kind of your first step as a practicing professional, what was your first experience with psychedelics on a personal level? Like, did you
marijuana?
Not marijuana.
Oh,
not marijuana. Did you try psychedelics prior to med school?
Yes, psychedelics were a part of my life since I was a late teen.
Really?
For me, I think I grew up in this culture of like, I read a lot of Hunter S. Thompson. I was a big fan of 60s and 70s era music.
Where'd you grow up?
In the Valley. San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Again, Bob Marley, Sublime, like the music culture was very much embedded in marijuana and mushrooms. I just didn't really get it. And then like, as I became like, I think I was 17 or 18, I started trying psilocybin with my friends. And it was one of these things where we knew we were doing something illegal, but the experiences were transformative. Like,
cool.
I am still great friends with those boys and girls from back then. I'm still good friends with them. And we joke about it all the time. We have this friend group and everyone's like a DJ, like a popular DJ and like a very successful internet guy and a lawyer and a famous producer, blah, 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 blah. It like keeps going. And we all like bonded over doing magic mushrooms together, watching Fantasia, running around the park, I'll never forget it. We watched Fantasia. We ran around the park. We hugged each other. We laughed.
Seniors in high school?
Yeah,
like junior, senior?
Yeah, like seniors in high school, something like that. I think senior, maybe junior.
That's so cool.
And yeah, it was so transformative and it was so benign. It felt so like not scary. And it felt like our little secret, it was our little thing that we did together. And
Who brought mushrooms into the friend group? Do you remember? You don't have to say a name.
No, I don't remember it like that. I think we were all just exploring that space. It was such a part of the culture in the Valley.
Yeah, yeah.
It was literally just there. It wasn't like we were going to some drug dealer or like, oh my God, we got it. It wasn't like that. It was all readily available without being weird.
That's like what alcohol was for my high school friends. We would get hammered at a park and run around. Yeah, but I was always scared of mushrooms. I remember hearing about people trying mushrooms and even smoking weed in high school. And I played basketball all through high school and college, and I thought something about those drugs were like druggy drugs, and they would like mess up my brain forever. And I was completely within that sphere of thinking at the time. But it's hilarious whenever I hear somebody talk about this and how they did it in high school prior to their brain developing.
Well, I think back then, it's hard to think back, but there was a difference between the plant drugs like the marijuana and psilocybin and all of the other drugs. The drug war was crazy, right? They told people PCP is going to make you like chew another person's head off or, like all this weird stuff. There's that famous thing you probably remember from when we were a kid. If you do LSD 7 or 10 times, you're going to be clinically insane. That's it. That was, these are all stories, they were memes before we had the internet. Mm-hmm. And they painted all these broad strokes about all the drugs when they're all different drugs. Like literally every drug we would talk about are different, completely different mechanism of action, different safety profiles, different settings you should be in, different goals of what the drug is for, right? So, I remember having a very distinct line between psilocybin and weed, which are plants. Mushrooms, plants.
Yeah.
Or like the chemical pill stuff. I never touched the pill. I never touched the powder until I was much older. And I think that was a really good idea because it's the kids that are taking a lot of, when you were like 16 and I saw girls taking MDMA every weekend, that's going to do a lot of damage. I mean, there's a role for this stuff, but when you're very, very young and again, we weren't doing mushrooms this was like a handful of experiences over the course of a year or two.
Yeah.
Like no more than 5 that I can even recall. So like we were instinctually doing ceremonial rite of passage experiences without having any consciousness of it.
Isn't that wild?
It's wild.
That's what people did over thousands of years too. That's crazy. You had it in you.
The culture.
Yeah.
I really think that Southern California music culture, it was
probably, I mean, I would venture a guess that it would be across America and potentially across the world because there just is something instinctual about that. Even going back to, there's a tribe in Finland called the Sami. Do you know, have you ever heard of that? So the Sami, they would have shamans that would go around every winter to people's houses. And if you were of a certain age, they would share mushrooms with you in ceremony. And you would have this transformative experience around the solstice. It's where we get Christmas from. It's a whole other story.
Yeah, but, and there's all that imagery of mushrooms within the Christmas.
And so that would happen there. And then, in China, they had their own thing. And all these other cultures would have their rites of passage that would include psychedelics for people that were around the age that you guys were going through. And there's got to be... It might be a little too out there and woo-woo, but there's something I think there that's just instinctual.
It's not woo-woo.
In humanity to seek out those types of experiences within a friend group or a culture.
I just think we evolved using psychoactive substances.
Yeah.
I think this is without a question. There's this great new book called The Immortality Key. Forget the gentleman's name. He's a great speaker, and he wrote a book about his research. He's like an archaeologist, anthropologist, and basically they found evidence that even back in the Greek and Roman times, there was they were using these rites of passage experiences. Eleusis is the city that they had, and people would go there and have these secret experiences where they would drink this brew.
There was ergot in the wine. Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, well, they found ergot, but they don't know exactly, but they know there were psychoactive substances in these pots.
Yeah, and the clay pots
pots.
that the vessels that had the drinks. Yeah.
That's just what they found. I think that there is way more, like hundreds of thousands of years. There's the stoned ape theory, which makes a whole lot of sense, that our ancestors were consuming these psychoactive substances, expanding their mind and helping drive culture and thinking. I think that's a fun way to think about it. I'm sure that's part of it, not like the whole story of evolution, but a part of it. Yeah, so I think that we for sure evolved having those kind of shamanistic experiences. I think it was part of our culture until maybe just a couple hundred years ago. You know, Western medicine is very new.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, very new. And we have a very, very short memory. We forgot what it's like to eat real food. We forgot what it's like to watch a human being be born and then die. We forgot what it's like to work hard, like really hard physically. We forgot what it's like to have real tribal bonding experiences. It's still left within our culture.
But things like technological advancements and...
I think it's the Western medicine system really screwed up drugs when they just monetized it, like to the point where it doesn't matter if it works or not. It's just about, can I sell a pill to how many millions of people for every single day? It's not good business to say, here's some psilocybin, I'll see you in 3 months because you're going to feel good for 3 months.
Right. It's terrible business.
It's terrible. Or
It's
here's
awful.
some psilocybin.
For your bottom line? No.
No.
Can't do that.
Which is why I still am guarded about what's going to happen in the future, because if the drug companies start seeing their bottom line affected by the legalization of this stuff, it's not going to be such an easy story. They easily changed everyone's mind in the 50s and 60s about the benefits or the risks, I suppose, of these drugs. What's to say they don't change it again? Like, sure, everyone's open-minded to it now, but look, these are very, very influential organizations. It's very easy to manipulate people's perspective. And with drugs, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of mystery. So it's on a snap, they can make a story, and then all of a sudden it's the worst thing in the world.
All it takes is one person overdosing or something like that, even though how many tens of thousands have died from prescribed pharmaceuticals. But yeah, I know MDMA is going into stage 3 trials.
It's in it
right now, or it's in stage 3 trials right now. And then it'll be approved for therapeutic use. But as soon as that happens, I wonder, what do you think would happen after that? If it comes to light that all these, it's starting with veterans and then it'll move into typical society, and all these people with PTSD and trauma are having these incredible moments of clarity and these transformative experiences where they don't need this drug and this drug and this drug and this drug. What's going to happen? I wonder if they're going to figure out a way to like overly monetize MDMA so that they can still keep their bottom line, or, God willing, we finally move into the space where we're not so reliant on big pharma because we're dipping into those medicines. But that's like a prayer. You know what I mean?
That's the part.
That's a prayer.
That's the part I don't know. That it's so much money. It's such a powerful entity, big pharma and big food. We talked about it on our last podcast, on your original podcast. Like, these they control the world. Like, they literally control the world in ways that are just super deceptive and subtle. And
which is insane because they inform each other. They get you sick on the food. They fix you with the pills, and then you get sick. It's insane.
And then they pay the FDA. So the FDA is just their little guinea pig, or their little their tool, right? Like more than half of the money that the FDA gets comes from big pharma. So it's I don't think and I heard Rick Doblin talking about it recently. Like, he also sees it. It's not like the coast, the road is open and there's not going to be bumps in the road. I think right now we're seeing this great revolution. We had some great books. We have these great speakers. We have, people like you educating people and sharing the story. I just don't know that we're there yet. There's this other issue of, okay, if you make these drugs legal and you start selling them the way we sell marijuana. Remember, the conversation started, I made a distinction with marijuana and these other drugs. You can smoke a ton of weed or eat a ton of weed. You'll be all high, but you're going to come back out of it for the most part. If you really go crazy with these other drugs, you can do some cognitive issue, you can do some damage. So what I mean, in a dream situation, these are prescribable drugs, but it seems like it's going the way of the, just recreational use.
Mushrooms will absolutely be a recreational drug. I know 3 people with mushroom companies
I know
that sell.
dozens.
Yeah, I mean that sell at music festivals. I've even seen one with a pop-up booth, and on the package it says psilocybin. I'm like, bro, this A is not legal. B, congratulations for figuring out how to be here at this festival.
I think they're just trying.
But
who's gonna bust them?
Right, exactly. Yeah, especially not in the desert.
Right.
I
mean, no, I just saw there's someone selling it online. You can go online and order some psilocybin. Look, I think microdose psilocybin is probably one of the best antidepressants that we have available to us. I do worry if people are gonna self-treat themselves. I'd love to see it in a clinical setting. I hope MDMA goes the way of the clinical setting, and I hope the whole MAPS thing, I hope there is some oversight and control. I do think MDMA is an amphetamine salt. It's very, very powerful. You certainly can take too much and have a very, very scary experience, or compromise your safety very rapidly with that drug. So I do worry if that becomes one of these here, here's a chocolate. Oh, I took 20.
Yeah,
I worry about that.
I'm not super into that. I hope it doesn't get to that either. The way MAPS is doing it is pretty incredible though, because they're actually training therapists. I don't think they're requiring therapists to try MDMA, although they're highly recommending it. And of course, you would want your MDMA therapist to have done MDMA. But yeah, they're doing it with a ton of oversight, from what I've heard.
Would you want your psychiatrist to have tried an antidepressant?
Phenomenal question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would. If they're gonna, I want, right? Why would I trust somebody who's telling me to do Zoloft if they've never experienced fucking Zoloft? Because they have other people that have experienced Zoloft, and they're told by the company that they probably are invested in financially. So they're getting some type of kickback one way or the other.
The doctors can't anymore, no.
They can't anymore?
No.
Since when?
The 90s, early 2000s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they got rid of that.
Oh, well, that's a good thing. Okay, great.
It is a good thing. I always ask the question, especially when I meet a psychiatrist or a primary doctor that does a lot of mental health. I'm like, it was mostly meant as a joke. You can't try all of the psychotropics, but I ask a lot of them, and they've never tried anything.
Something. Yeah, it doesn't have to be all of them. No. But do you feel benefit from one of these things that you're prescribing?
A lot of them have never tried any drugs because the kind of people that go into medicine or pharmacy are very straight-laced people that follow the rules. They're they worked very hard to get that degree. They work very hard to get to that position, and often those are people that have never tried anything. So back to the start of you're the bro doctor. I'm just a person. I'm just a person that has found myself to become a doctor while trying a million other things and trying to be a diverse human, and I think that comes across. I don't think that's the vast majority of providers because it's just so difficult to become a doctor. The barriers to entry are so overwhelming. It's most people that are going to smoke some weed are I'm not going to be a doctor. That's crazy. I'm not trying to do that. So I think it's a small, very select population of people that are providers, not just doctors, NPs, PAs, and now more and more, over the last few years especially, people are leaving their traditional practices and opening their mind to these different treatments. I think that's one of the benefits of the COVID situation is people saw the weaknesses of our healthcare system. They saw how unresponsive the healthcare system is. So they're trying to do their own thing, But in general, most people in healthcare are not super knowledgeable. They're certainly not experienced with psychedelic medicine. And they're just as fearful as any random person. And they're the same thing goes with food. I have to bring it up because it's such
yeah.
They don't see it as a priority. They don't get educated on it. They don't think about teaching people how to eat. They don't think about getting that education. So the fundamental thing that makes you healthy is what you put in your body. Like I've always said that, like the number one, you can exercise, you can meditate, you can do all this stuff. If you're not giving yourself good food, or worse yet, if you're putting toxic stuff into your mouth all the time, you're not going to do well. You're not going to be healthy. And like doctors are the same as the regular population with that, you know, they don't, and people look to them to help, and they're just as heavy. They're just as diabetic. Have just as many of these mental health problems, if even more, as I mentioned. So it's a tough situation in healthcare. There's too much, you know, like just recently, Mark Cuban went on a whole rant on Twitter.
Yeah, I saw that.
You saw that he was talking about like, you know, doctors. What was his like specific crux? He made a comment about how
Jamie, will you pull that up, please?
He made a comment about how doctors, you know, aren't the authority, and then Elon Musk was like, oh, we need to make a doctor panel to audit all of the content about health. And then he had to backtrack and talk about how like, oh, doctors work so hard for their degree, I don't want to disrespect them. It's all of it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the doctors
said, here's the top two. He said, Twitter over the last few days, we can't trust the government. They will censor our right to free speech. We can't trust government. They will give the wrong medical advice. We can't trust big tech. They will censor our free speech. We need government to regulate big tech. I want to share what I think about MDs. I love each and every one that busted their ass, borrowed too much money, sacrificed more than we can ever quantify in hopes of helping their patients. Medicine is an imprecise science. The uncertainties far outnumber the absolutes.
This was a response to something he posted earlier.
And there's more probably, yeah. Yeah.
If people are interested, they could check it out. My point is there's a realization that there's a disconnect between reality and healthcare, like the healthcare system and the reality of helping people.
Yeah.
And everyone wants to do something better about it, but there's just so many challenges. If you just look at any of these topics, you could go on any social media platform and there's doctors promoting what I'm talking about. And then there's other doctors that are completely irate, beside themselves, saying my license should be taken away. Not me, because I don't actually talk about this stuff so much online. I'm just way too busy to sit there and type stuff online.
Yep.
But like I watch my colleagues that are promoting this stuff actively, and they just get lit up by their other colleagues. It's just like, it's really, really hard to change people's opinion. And when you go through so much training and you're so aggressively indoctrinated into a way of thinking, you can't possibly be wrong. I couldn't have possibly spent $200,000 on my medical education, and most of it is wrong. Well, before I even went to med school, there's the saying that by the time you graduate your training, 50% of what you know is irrelevant. The reality is like 80 or 90% of it is irrelevant, because 50% of it has already changed, and another big chunk of it is made up. So breakfast is the most important meal of the day is made up.
Right.
That is a made up fact.
That was marketing.
That was marketing.
Yeah.
Famously.
Yeah.
But not so famously, because I hear doctors repeating it all the time.
Do you still hear that today?
All the time. And they still talk about it.
They got to add 2 words to the end of that sentence. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day to skip.
To skip. Ooh.
To skip.
To skip.
It needs 2 words at the end of it.
Technically, intermittent fasting strategies are best if you do breakfast and lunch.
But breakfast not right when you wake up, right?
No.
You breakfast, like I wake up around 8, I don't eat until like noon.
Yeah.
Because I skip breakfast. So my breakfast is
we call that
noon.
lunch, but yeah.
Yeah.
Break fast, you're breaking the fast, whatever. Right. But like assuming that you don't wake up and immediately have to break your fast, whatever. Look, there's so many of these misunderstandings. I have more of these like quick references for food because I'm so obsessed with it. Mm-hmm. But it's not even just psychedelics. It's like diabetes or weight management. You know, everyone's just so quick to jump on something. It's like, oh, I heard Elon Musk injected semaglutide, Trulicity. That's it. Now every single person is coming into my clinic. I want that. I want that. Mm-hmm. I want that. All of a sudden, everyone's willing to spend $700 on a course of Trulicity so that they can lose 5 pounds. And I'm like, but you won't pay a $40 copay. It's just, it's all messed up. Mm-hmm. It's all messed up. It's so, guys, if you take anything from this conversation, doctors are in a really tough situation. Yeah. Whatever they believe, whether they believe what I'm talking about or there's traditional Western medicine doctors, the pressure, like it's like a pressure cooker. The pressure from all sides, from the patient, from the insurer, from the employer, from the pharmacy, from the book, it's like so overwhelming that when you like get mad at your doctor for something or other, and they just like, it's done. It's like whatever I have to do to get out of the visit, because you don't realize we're seeing 20 or 30 a day. Most doctors are seeing at least 15 or 20. It's so challenging.
Yeah.
And by the way, when that visit is done, everything needs to be documented, or you need to pay someone to document it.
Yeah.
I don't want people to feel like sympathy. You just brought it up. No, I do. I want people to feel sympathy for the providers. Whatever they believe, they are put in an impossible situation where they're making sometimes life or death decisions, but they have to oblige this concept of the customer's always right. This concept of like service industry. Like a doctor's office is not McDonald's, but people treat it as such. You know, the doctor walks in and they're like still on their phone. That whole thing of like respecting the doctor, long gone. By the time I became a doctor 10 years ago, it was gone. No one really cares. You're just the guy to say, hey, I read something online that I disagree. And the point is, disagree with me. It's fine. But like, show respect to providers, not just because of what they're saying or recommending, but because of the challenge and the overwhelming burden they must carry.
Yeah.
Not just the decision making, but the customer service aspect of it, and the liability aspect of it, the fear of lawsuits, the fear of getting sued, the fear of, dude, it's just fear. Like,
fear.
I can't. There's so much fear, and
Yeah.
it's founded in a system that is broken, and in a system that pressures people so much to do things they don't want to do. You know, if you go through that whole feed, people in the comment section, they're really like clear about this, that like they have friends that are doctors that agree or don't agree with whatever's happening, and they still can't practice that way, because if they try to, the insurance company, their employer, or the patient or the pharmacy will pressure them into just doing what you're supposed to do, quote unquote.
Damn.
Supposed to do. There's so many pressures. It's really, really challenging.
Can we get to a place where doctors are operating outside of these pressures? It feels like we're moving there. Maybe I'm in a bubble because I know people like you and other people in the medical world that don't operate as much within those parameters of fear and traditional systemic pressures. But it feels like we're moving into a place where there's at least more of a conscious approach that people are taking for their own health that doesn't fall within the strict guidelines of, these traditional medicinal recommendations.
I hope so. I don't know that I see a huge movement in the providers. I think there's more providers stepping into that space, but I don't feel like, again, I think that I think that the people are picked to become physicians that are going to follow rules and that are going to fall in line. So you start with people that are very, very motivated to follow rules. You then charge a ludicrous amount for the training. You then train them so hard. It's like being pot committed in poker, right? Once you got all your chips on the table and you're like looking at that river card at the end, like it's very hard to be like, oh, I'm gonna just take that loss because
right.
I'm gonna lose this hand. It's like, no, I have to keep going. I have to keep going because, when I brought up even something like marijuana or intermittent fasting or now psilocybin to someone who's been practicing medicine, I've been doing it for 10 years. Someone who's been doing it for like 20 years or 30 years. Who am I to tell them that what they did for 20 or 30 years is wrong? And I get their perspective. Like, who is this young whippersnapper telling me I'm wrong? It's very hard to change. So maybe what you're saying is maybe there's a generation of physicians like coming up now that in 20 years will make a difference. Now, will the pharmaceutical companies intervene before that and make some stories or create some kind of pushback to this whole thing? I hope not, but I don't know. I think that it's really beautiful in America that we have states.
Mm-hmm.
People, I think they take it for granted a bit. Yes, you have the feds, but you can move to a state that has laws and has people that are more like-minded. Yeah. Or another state that if you're differently minded. Mm-hmm. That is amazing. It is amazing to be able to go, I loved California, but now I really, I don't like the politics here. I'm going to move to Austin, and all of a sudden an hour and a half flight and you're living around same language, same food, but the laws are different and the environment is different. That's incredibly powerful. That's a freedom that you do not get to appreciate in many other places, if anywhere. I don't know another country that offers that sort of, diversity of thought. So there's something beautiful about America. But I do worry that it's not going to be like everyone. I think there's going to be people that open up their consciousness. There's going to be states that are going to allow doctors and people to manipulate their consciousness with substances, but there's also going to be
fucking Texas that claims to be the most freest fucking state. Those hypocritical fucks, dude. I bitch about this all the time to my friends that live in Texas that are like, "Hey, it's the free. Why don't you move to Texas where you have freedom?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, try smoking weed outside. Yeah. Try it. Yeah. Try it. Oh, nobody cares. It's still illegal. It's crazy.
Oh, they care.
It's wild. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to go back. You're tripping out watching Fantasia with all your homies. Then you get into med school and you're practicing medicine in the Midwest. During that time, during your formative years, were you also actively reaching out for psychedelic substances on a personal growth motivation or in any other type of way? Were mushrooms or any other substances part of your like personal life at that time?
Yeah, I think when I practice medicine, I do it with a very clear mind and a huge heart. And that is a gift and a curse, because sometimes one patient can destroy my week because I'm completely open. And other times I can have a beautiful encounter and change my whole like thinking because I'm open. So first of all, I don't know if I need to clarify, like when I practice medicine and I'm working, it's like I'm 100% sober minus my caffeine.
Sure.
Just because the way you answered that question, I just want to be clear. Like I, however, have always made these, what we in the space now call these rites of passage ceremonies or bonding ceremonies. To me, drugs have always played that role. I have never like, let's do Molly on a Saturday because we got nothing to do. That never made sense to my brain. But
you should try it. It makes a lot of sense.
On a Saturday?
Yeah.
Just sitting?
Saturday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always instinctually had these transformative group experiences. And we can talk about ketamine's a little bit different. I think I'm like mostly talking about, so MDMA, psilocybin, and marijuana, having transformative group experiences, bonding over music, over festivals, over a beach, over a campfire. I've had those experiences since my late teens throughout my life. I got married. I'm a lot more serious now. I have businesses. I don't have the opportunities to have those. It takes time to recover. So I always did it with an intention. The book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, it outlined it. And I was so in love with it because I'm like, oh my God, you just put words to the thing that I always just did. I always set an intention. There was always a reason to get together with my friends, whether it was to see each other after a long time, whether it was to bond over some accomplishment, whether it was to celebrate something. There's always an intention to it. Even when I was like young, there was an intention to like, let's explore this experience. That's why we weren't just the whole Fantasia thing was very intentional. We wanted to see that experience. What does it mean? We had read about it and we wanted to like explore that thing, which we did, and it was transformative. Yeah. So yeah, I think I like, at least with those three substances, I've always used them. Marijuana more like on the daily to end of day instead of a glass of wine sort of thing. But with MDMA and psilocybin, never frequently, but always thoughtfully with intention. I was always obsessed with set and setting. To me, that was the thing that made the most sense. Because everyone would talk about bad trips, and I'm like, it's not a bad trip. It's the asshole sitting across from me. That's the bad trip. Right. Or it's the like, why do we do drugs and it's freezing cold and I have no water? That's insane. Like, why would I do that? Right. So I was always the guy that's like, no. We got to get the spot. It's going to be here. We got to make sure we're safe. Everyone's got like, we're not driving anywhere. We got a place to sleep. We got our food situation. Like there's always a lot of planning. And I think for that reason, I never really had any like terrible experiences. And all my friends were always like attracted to it because there was thought put into it. If you just like willy-nilly pop a molly, it can go real south, like I said. But if you're doing it very thoughtfully, if you're thinking about the milligrams, if you know exactly your sources, you know exactly what you're taking, you know exactly where you're going to be, you control all these variables that can really make things dangerous and uncomfortable, then it's a very beautiful, like overwhelmingly beautiful and loving and transformative experience. So yes, I've done that throughout, not very frequently, but frequently enough to keep my sanity. You know, I've never been on an antidepressant because of that, because like I said, I have my tools. So that's what I've done throughout. I will share now my ketamine experience because I think it's very important. I discovered ketamine through a friend who did it recreationally. I was scared of ketamine because I never wanted to. I'm scared of all the drugs. Like I'm not like, oh my God, let's do it. Like it's always fear based because you got to have that fear to respect it. You have to learn about it. You have to understand what you're doing. You really have to understand what you're doing. And you have to take it slow, and you have to be around people that have experienced, like you have to be shamaned into it. So it was always that. But I got to a point a few years ago, it's been quite a bit of time now, where I was stuck. I was like living with my parents. The business was just starting. Like, what am I doing? Is this person good in my life? Is that person good in my life? What am I doing day to day? And I tried ketamine sort of accidentally, long story, with a friend, with a bunch of friends. And I was kind of like shocked by it. And then I felt this overwhelming feeling of clarity because of the dissociative state. The dissociative state was cool at that moment, but the clarity I felt after I reassociated was like life-changing. I was like, oh my God, I'm fine. Like, I'm not really depressed. Like, these are the feelings I have, and I could like see them like a list. Like, here's a list of these feelings that are weird, and now I can look at them instead of being in them. I was like looking at them from the side.
This is post
ketamine experience, because ketamine is short-lived. This is like a half-life of, 20, 30 minutes. After you take a dose, after about 30, 40, 45 minutes, you're back to normal. Like,
why is that
normal
called half-life instead of just life?
Because
I don't understand that. Yeah.
Because in drugs, in the pharmacology of drugs, pharmacokinetics of drugs, we measure how long it takes for half of the substance to leave your body.
Okay.
So we think about like how many half-lives it takes to completely leave, but it's half-life. It's just the pharmacokinetics conversation.
Okay, so if you're saying the half-life is 30 minutes, does that mean
half, after about 30 or 45 minutes, half of the dose is processed through your body, and at that point you still have it in you, but you're not like disassociated.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you could take enough, and a lot of clinics, they're doing IV drips, so they're just dripping it in. So until they stop. But that's why it's so cool, because they can stop the drip, and 30, 45 minutes later, you're fine. Yeah. Unless they put 500 milligrams in you, which I don't recommend. Some clinics do, whatever.
What was that first experience with ketamine? Was this a pill? Was it a drip?
It was.
What was the scene and setting for that?
It was a recreational setting.
Okay.
It was a recreational setting, and it was very like loving, male bonding situation. And people wanting to share that experience with each other. And some of them were very experienced with it. And some of them, like myself, were very fearful of it. But it was, that group always shared this stuff together. So it was like that moment where finally they were able to share it with me.
That's so funny, dude. My first and the only time I've ever experienced ketamine was with 5 other dudes. Yeah. It was a male bonding. Yeah.
It's fine.
It's so funny. Yeah, it was the nasal inhaler thing. Yeah. And I was with my buddy in Austin and 4 of his friends, and it ended up being a creative writing session. That's what we wanted to do. And we all did the nasal spray, a little extra because it was prescribed, so it wasn't super, super strong. So we did a little bit extra. Okay, cool. And then we did some breathing, then we did some writing, and it was hilarious. Everyone was a little high. And then we jumped in his pool and ate steak with our bare hands. It was very male. Very masculine. Yeah.
It's powerful. It's not as like scary as people think, except when you're like really disassociated. If you're not ready for it and you're not experienced, it can be alarming. So when we do the protocol in my clinic, so I have clinic called Evolve Healthcare, and we have a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy program. And yeah, like the first experience is always a very low dose because it's jarring, and you're like, oh boy. And then you get used to it, and you embrace it, and then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper. But still, after like 45 minutes, it's gone. Like you just go deep, and then you come back.
And do you also have trained therapists on? And I would assume that's not you, right?
Right.
So what is that process like?
So Evolve Mental Health, that's my expansion of Evolve Healthcare to mental health. I'm working on getting full-time psych NPs to do just general.
What is NP?
A nurse practitioner. It's a physician extender. I have a ketamine certified NP right now, and I'm working on getting more. These are people that are trained in administering ketamine. It's very, very safe in general, but there's protocols, and we want to do everything by the book. Everything I do in my practice is evidence-based by the book. I do that intentionally because of what we talked about earlier. There's gonna be this wild west of people like doing stuff and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I want to establish a baseline of like, this is a place where you can get the evidence-based model, the model that's driven by decades of research, and that's 100% like legal, so that there's a distinction between, there's a gray zone over there and people are trying this, but there's a version of this that you could come and do it, and it's 100% legal, and it's thoughtful, and it's not an IV drip 500 milligrams over the course of an hour where you're completely asleep and sedated and you can't have any active therapy under that dose. And yeah, maybe there's a benefit on a neurological level to those kinds of doses of ketamine, but I think the real power comes when you take that right dose where you disassociate, but you're fully alert and fully there. Maybe there's 10 minutes where you're sort of like in a dream-like state, but then you come back, and it's during that coming back process, what I was describing that I had, where the disassociation allows you to look at yourself from a completely different perspective. And when you pair that moment with a therapist who is thoughtful, experienced, and guiding you, not just guiding you through the trip, but guiding you through your emotions and your feelings. Someone who before you took the drug with, you had set an intention, so they understand where you're trying to go and can redirect you if you veer away, because that's important. You don't want to just take it and veer off into some thought that maybe some
you don't want to take it and drop into a K-hole.
No, so hold on. The K-hole is the goal. The K-hole
is the goal.
Yeah.
All right, great.
The K-hole is one of these drug war things. They
right.
really, really fear-mongered the K-hole.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, as soon as you hear K-hole, you think somebody who's just a lifeless blob on a beanbag.
The K-hole is the disassociated state that you're laying in a cloud of magical feelings, and you're just in your mind floating through space, and it's one of the best places.
So so within the context of a guided therapy session, that is the goal. That
eventually,
ish, yeah.
Eventually, not everyone needs to go that deep. The first session is you don't go that deep.
Yeah, that would be way too intense.
Way too intense, but. Yeah, you try to go there. The thing with ketamine, it's so special. You don't need to go there. So there's a version of ketamine that's FDA approved. It's called Spravato. It's made by Johnson & Johnson. It just quietly got approved. Ketamine was made in the 1950s and is a generic drug. It's one of the top 10 used drugs in the world. It's incredibly safe anesthesia drug because it causes you to become sleepy and have no memory, and your pain goes down, and then you wake up and you don't remember anything, and it doesn't cause respiratory suppression. So for example, if a kiddo breaks their arm, like when I was a little kid, I broke my arm, went to the hospital. Look, if you give a kid an opiate or a benzo and they stop breathing and you're giving them Narcan, it's a big issue, right? And it is tricky, and you don't want to give an addictive substance. So ketamine is this amazing drug. They can give you an intramuscular shot, kid passes out. There's no concern for respiratory suppression or blood pressure craziness or, addiction processes. And yet they're asleep. They don't feel pain. Reposition their arm. Done dilly. They wake up. They giggle, and they're moving on with their life, And a lot of those giggle videos that you see are that. And they just, they just don't talk about what that drug is because it was part of this drug war thing. And by the way, it was always legal, and there was always ketamine clinics. Throughout these last few decades, there was clinics all over America. Everywhere. Yeah. They're just quiet, Now it's coming up, and people like myself are really trying to push it because I think it's so powerful. So, the K-hole is not a bad thing. It is the disassociated state. It is kind of the goal because I don't want people asleep. I want people consciously dreaming, if you will.
It's almost like lucid thought.
Totally what it is.
Yeah.
It's totally what it is. And the more experience you have with it, the more you can guide that thinking and steer yourself through a journey. But in the clinical setting, that's what the therapist is there for. They're there before to set an intention. They're there to monitor and guide. And then as you're coming out of it, that's where I think the real magic happens. You're getting this new perspective, this fresh perspective on yourself and the world. And you have someone there that can guide you through the thinking and the feelings and the emotions of it. And you do that about, there's an intention setting. You do about 4 or 5 treatment sessions with drug. And then you always do an integration. The integration is so important. Thinking back on what you just did and what does it mean and how does it connect to that original intention? And sometimes it's not like the therapist has some crazy magical insight. It's just they're giving you a platform to talk openly about it and just working your way through it and asking the right questions and going back and readdressing some of the things that you had discussed in the beginning with this new perspective. That's where you're able to unlock things. And
go ahead.
One more thing.
Yeah.
There's also, from our research, we know, and you guys can look this up, that ketamine itself causes neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And that neuroplasticity allows you to rewire your thinking in your brain. And that happens for weeks after the treatment. So that
neuroplasticity, just to break it down, because that's something I'm trying to learn more about too. That's you're rebuilding the connection between neurons in your brain that can allow for different modes of thinking about things. Is that somewhat of a way to explain it?
Totally. Neurons are this cell. It's like a cell with a nucleus, and they have all of these crazy long dendrites, and they're of all different shapes and sizes. You have neurons in your brain that run the entire spinal cord. So there's a little nucleus here, and it goes all the way down into your tailbone. So there are these amazing cells, and they use electrical signals. They use changes in electrical current to communicate to each other, okay? Your brain is very good at connecting neurons and then following that pattern because that's how it learns. It learns by repeating patterns. In fact, if you play the piano physically and then you stop playing it and think about playing the piano, those same neurons are firing even if you're not doing it, and you're locking them in. And then later when you come back and you do that, you're actually better than you were before. That's the brain going through this process of creating these connections and building these patterns, okay? Psychedelics in general, especially like acid is one fun one to think about because it really like makes them communicate in ways they're not normally doing. And that's a fun conversation because you can like, see sound and smell colors and all this amazing stuff.
You see the trees breathe.
Yeah, it's called synesthesia. It's when your senses mix together. But more importantly, your brain's really good at finding a pattern and then rock and rolling and doing it because that's, how we survive is like repeating and habits, and that's like very evolutionary advantageous. But sometimes you build patterns that you want to get out of, like a groove. The famous example they use is like a groove on a record. That groove is deeply embedded. You've been playing with it, playing it over and over again, but if you want to not feel that way or you want to change that groove, you need something to change it. Sometimes it could be a catastrophic event and you're forced to change it, or whatever. Or in this case, it's a drug that actually encourages the nerves to change their pattern of firing and change their connections. And we know ketamine does that, at least in a petri dish. So, you can't, fMRI studies, which are looking at the brain through MRI, you can't really prove that, but they've looked at
there's a correlation.
Yeah, but they've looked at like on slides that there's they've shown it multiple times that it increases the neurons' abilities to create new connections.
Cool. So
it's magical in that way. So for me, the reason why ketamine I think is so cool is that you have this transformative experience, which alone is powerful, and then as that you think about that experience, your brain is unlocked to create new grooves. And so if you're doing this over a series of time and you're really focused on the therapy, I just want everyone to like really take that as like what I'm here to talk about. The therapy is essential. You can take some ketamine and feel good for a few weeks. It's not really the key. And microdosing psilocybin, for example, it takes the edge off, but the key is unlocking your brain and resetting these grooves. And that only happens with what we call the shadow work, like the thinking about the stuff that bothers you, thinking about the things that you've suppressed, and processing them and reprocessing them. And it's the reprocessing and creating new neural grooves that is healing. That is what's healing. You know, you mentioned PTSD and MDMA, right? We could talk about that for a second. Like, so in the context of what I'm just talking about, when you have PTSD, you've created a dramatic, scary emotional response associated with a particular memory. That's what PTSD is. You think about that thing and you have this fight or flight response.
Or something reminds you of that thing and it kicks in.
And it kicks in the sympathetic response and fear response, and your amygdala fires like crazy and you're gone, right? So what does MDMA do? It promotes a feeling of love and acceptance and empathy, right? So what is the therapy? It's very simple. You get comfortable with the drug, you're on the drug, and then the therapist is having you re-experience some or all of those feelings, but now you're in a love mode. Your heart chakra is open, and you're forgiving, and you're empathetic. And now you're thinking about this terrible thing. And look, you can't change this terrible thing that happened to us. Let's talk about like a war veteran, best example. They can't change that they lost their brothers and sisters on the battlefield and watch some terrible thing go down. But what they can do is think about that again, inhibit the sympathetic fear response, induce a sense of love, acceptance, and empathy, and reassociate that memory with love, acceptance, and empathy. And that is where the healing comes from. So then when they're not under the drug, when they think about that terrible tragedy, again, the feelings, the groove, the neural groove that connects that memory to love and empathy and understanding is already been started. And they can lean into that, and they can continue to inhibit the sympathetic response of fear and flight. So that's how it all works. That's how it all works, is it gives you a chance to change the neural mechanisms that drive your brain, separate yourself. So got ketamine, which disassociates you and lets you look at things from call it a third or fourth person perspective. You've got MDMA, which induces euphoria, love, and empathy, which allows you to then think about things from that perspective.
So when it comes to these therapies, both MDMA and I guess specifically ketamine, because that's your strongest suit.
So special.
Yeah.
I just think it's so special.
I'm curious about quantifying a patient's need for psychedelic assisted therapy versus typical therapy, and what your perspective is on that. Because from the people I know, it's typically somebody who's been through some shit that finds an incredible benefit from like an ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT therapy retreat, or a ketamine therapy, or MDMA therapy. But what about folks who struggle with just obscene amounts of depression? Is that like, how do you as a doctor draw that line? And maybe that's not the best term to use, but like, how do you differentiate between a patient who would benefit more from psychedelic assisted therapy versus traditional or non-psychedelic assisted therapy?
Very hard question. I think that's something,
and it might be an evolving.
Yeah, I think that's
answer.
the evolving. I think that's the evolving answer for me today. And I guarantee you, Brent, we'll do this podcast in a few years, and it'll be a whole different answer to this question.
Yeah, as it probably should be.
We're in
right?
it. Yeah, we're in it. Like I'm deep in it, and everyone's in it, and we're just trying to navigate, and we're trying to do it safely, and then blah, 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 blah. We're like in the middle of it. That's what this. We'll look back at this podcast series and be like, oh, we were right in the middle of that party. Like, look where we ended up.
Yeah.
So, I think for me anyway, people have to be open-minded to it. People have to have failed the traditional medicines, because I can't give someone ketamine who's on a bunch of other psychotropic drugs, because there are interactions, and I think that's tricky.
Okay.
I think most people, people that don't want to be sedated, suppressed, and sort of numbed anymore, and they've failed the traditional therapies, they're people that should look at psychedelics. People that don't want to be numbed, and even if they haven't, and they don't want to have that, antidepressant, that SSRI, SNRI, that creates this numbing effect, they want to try something different. I think that's someone for it. I think it comes, as of today, it comes down to less about me selecting the patients and more like people being ready and open to it. It's too much fear. There's too much uncertainty, and there's the price of it. So insurance companies don't currently pay for it. So I had mentioned Spravato earlier, the Johnson & Johnson product. I've been approved to be a Spravato provider. I've tried like 4 times to get them to actually deliver me the drug. Never got it, never got there.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay.
They have this like system to dispense
Sure.
it. It's like very, very convoluted. And I've just never had an insurance company approve it and then deliver on the medicine. The other thing is they don't make it, like I can't promote it aggressively because anytime I'll do a Spravato session, whenever I am successful with it, which I'd love to if I can, I actually lose money because they have to sit there for about 2 hours after insufflating the drug. And I get paid for just established care visit, which is about $90. So for me to have that room occupied plus a provider monitoring, it's going to cost me more than $90. Yeah. So they approved it without making a financial model that makes it viable for a private provider. So I think there's psychiatry clinics and places that are really doing like the real work that are not financial models, or maybe they're government funded or like they're funded by some other thing. So they don't have to be financially viable. They're just providing mental health. So imagine like a large organization, like some large corporation that has like specialties and surgical centers and primary care centers and mental health. They don't need to make money in primary care and mental health because they'll make all their money in the surgical center and the heart stuff and like the stuff that makes money.
Right.
So that those models, they are able to. So you can find Spravato clinics out there. They're just tend to be like large corporate entities because financially it's not a viable model. So right now it's cost prohibitive. So ketamine is very expensive because I have to pay a full-time certified it's either psych NP or ketamine.
So because it's like that makes you a little bit more like how does that affect your choice when it comes to patients to,
I mean, how many people can afford thousands of
dollars? Right. Okay, so that's what creates the barrier.
Cost prohibitive.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I just imagine somebody like a veteran that I know that's seen some crazy shit. That seems like absolutely come in tomorrow. But somebody that's like, got fired and going through a breakup at the same time might. But I don't know. Like, is that the world? Are we moving into a space where psychedelic assisted therapy could begin to come closer to the numbers that typical therapy does? Can psychedelic therapy have I guess the answer is yes, but should psychedelic therapy be encouraged for folks who don't suffer from these massive negative psychological events?
Great question. 2 questions, actually. Will it?
And should it?
Yeah. Will it? I don't know. I can't imagine a version.
I can't imagine it does.
I can't imagine a version of this where the drug companies
allow it to come up to par with Zoloft. Yeah.
Done. Right. So there's that financial issue.
So that won't happen.
It might. You never know. Laws change.
Sure.
Laws change.
Yeah.
Things.
And public discourse changes. Yeah.
Look, the VA is doing the studies because people are suffering. So people know that people are suffering. Mm-hmm. If the government's going to get honest about the giant depression, anxiety, suicide pandemic that is actually currently going on, especially post-COVID, they would do some kind of financial incentives or disincentivize the big pharma and big insurance to inhibit the process. But whatever, like that's way above our pay grade, Brent. Like it's so deep. But should it? Now that's a yes. I would love to be in a world where if I have a patient that's going through a traumatic, like sure, a breakup can be crazy traumatic, or like getting fired. It's a disaster for a lot of people, that I could offer them everything from a microdose psilocybin or a microdose MDMA experience that I think should be driven by physicians and providers, or even a ketamine session, an intention setting. So, go do therapy. Well, what if therapy meant you did a session with my therapist who set an intention and went over what it is you're feeling right now since you lost your job. Then you did 1 or even 2. You don't need to do 5. You could just do 1 or 2 experiences with the drug and therapy, and then an integration session. Those 4 basically weeks, 4 days to have a tool to manage it that doesn't suppress and sedate, that gives you, I think that would be amazing for most people. Like literally for most people. I think microdosing psilocybin would be very effective for many, 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 many people. That's the one that makes me nervous because there's so much efficacy. It's so good. It really is going to be a problem for the drug companies. So we'll see what really happens with that stuff. It might be too far gone. Like they may not be able to do anything like they like with marijuana, like it's,
Oh yeah, that's
yeah. So we'll see. But I do think this is something that most, if not all, humans should have access to. No, all humans should have access to. Should they do it? That's going to be an individual decision based on your health risk factors, what other drugs you're on, what other medical problems you might have. It's one drug like a stimulant like MDMA might not be a good candidate, whereas like some psilocybin, which is not a stimulant, it might be better for another. So there's a lot to that. But I think, should every human have access to these conscious altering experiences? Yes.
Yeah.
Did we have them for hundreds of thousands of years? Without a doubt. Over time, did that become available maybe mostly to like an elite group, like the story about Eleusis in Greece and Rome? Probably. We don't really know, because they weren't allowed to keep records about it. So we're only finding out about it now through these really amazing researchers that have kind of uncovered the story that they were using ergot and maybe other substances to create wines that got you, in an altered state. I think that, people have been saying this more recently, like the government should not control your consciousness. And these drugs are not dangerous. If these drugs were really dangerous, I wouldn't be here talking about it, but they're not. And everyone knows that. And they did these great studies where they were looking at the burden of like morbidity and mortality for a bunch of substances. And like number one is alcohol. Number one is opiates by far. Yeah. And then it's alcohol. And then it's like cocaine. And then it's like stimulant, over-the-counter or prescribed stimulants. Like MDMA, psilocybin, and marijuana are at the bottom of the list.
But and
at the bottom
even
of the
like
list.
Isn't it like I'll read about an MDMA overdose, but it ended up being like dehydration. So what's the
huge
difference there?
Love that you brought this up. It's from we're talking about that same study that came out.
Okay.
So the reason why MDMA was at the very bottom is because they were looking at direct morbidity and mortality from the drug. Like, okay,
direct death from the drug.
Like opiates. Like you take too much opiates,
it's like a drop of
and
fentanyl,
you stop breathing,
and you're dead.
Yeah. But you literally, it causes you to stop breathing.
That's what causes it. Right.
Alcohol, it causes you to have an ulcer or to have liver failure.
Right. Exactly.
Or to drive drunk
heart,
and die.
Whatever.
Yeah. Cocaine will cause like hypertensive urgency and cause a stroke, or it'll cause a heart attack. Yada yada yada. Right. But with Molly or MDMA, the trouble is you are dehydrated or you're overhydrated. So almost all the deaths related to MDMA are from hyponatremia or hyperthermia.
Is hyponatremia?
Hyponatremia is too low salt. So you become very thirsty. You become very thirsty on
because you're
MDMA,
running out of electrolytes.
And so you drink water, sweat all the salt out. And so this is like something I was talking about when I'm talking about food. I'm like, you got to drink salt water, guys. Like this whole like vilifying salt is crazy. Without salt, you die. And a low salt diet is silly. It's just because our food is processed and they put all the garbage salt in our food. So they said don't add salt. But if you're eating a clean sapien diet, like we eat, an animal-based, whole foods-based, even a vegetarian whole foods-based diet, you better be adding salt to a lot of stuff or supplementing with salt packets, because you're going to go hypernatremic. You're going to feel like shit. You're going to get dehydrated. So the problem with MDMA is these people are taking it at party environments, or they're very young people that aren't being supervised, and they'll just dance for 4 hours and get hyperthermic, get dehydrated, or vice versa. They'll just keep pounding water, and that water will dilute all their salt out in addition to the sweating of their salt, so they'll die from an electrolyte disturbance. Those are the deaths.
You can die from an electrolyte disturbance.
I think that's the most common one. I can't remember which was more common, the dehydration hyperthermia or the hyponatremia from electrolyte disturbance. Hyponatremia is deadly. You die when you get to a certain low level of salt. And
hyponatremia, a condition that occurs when the level of sodium in the blood is too low. I've never heard that before. That's crazy. What? Very common. More than 3 million U.S. cases per year.
Yeah.
So that could happen from people avoiding salt so much.
Yeah, because they're told that it's like the worst drug, but go ahead and eat all the sugar you want.
Damn.
That's not toxic.
That's crazy.
So there's so many misunderstandings. And by the way, again, if you go talk to a the traditional doctor, they don't know this stuff. This isn't educated. This isn't stuff that you got to pursue and acquire this knowledge.
Yeah.
So oftentimes I'll talk to a comedian and they'll know more about it than a lot of my doctor colleagues. It's sad.
Maybe I should go into medicine, dude.
Well,
this was the other question I have for you regarding ketamine therapy. Are the therapists that you work with, have they experienced ketamine and have they had their own sessions?
So the therapists I'm working with, it's a group with one leading the charge. They are ketamine certified and they actually teach other ketamine providers. They teach within the ketamine education and are very much, I brought this concept to them in the last couple of years and opened their eyes to it. And now they're excited to try it. They haven't yet tried it, but now it's like something they're very anxious to try because they see it. But there's traditional cognitive behavior therapy. I don't think you need anything fancy and magical. You just need someone who really cares and who knows how to be kind of this third-party guide. Drug, no drug, it's kind of irrelevant. The therapy is the therapy.
Yeah.
Sure, if you have someone who's really experienced with psychedelics, maybe, but I actually worry that they get a little too woo-woo. I want very traditional, basic guidance because the work is done in the mind. The work is done by the experience. It's like, I don't know that the therapy modality matters as much as the person being there, thoughtful, attentive, and malleable to what you're experiencing. Because some trips, one day you might be very overwhelmed with the feelings that you're having, and that therapist needs to keep their mouth shut and like, hey, let's put some music on. We'll talk for 10 minutes after you come out of it. And then other times they need to talk. They need to just say something, and you need to be there to listen and answer questions. And then other times you need to coach them a little bit, like, hey, it's okay, just breathe deeply. You don't need to get anxious, and hold their hand. That gentle humanistic touch, that's what you need. Doing CBT or doing this kind of style or asking these questions, I don't know how relevant that is as opposed to what is the person in front of me, what was their intention, what is their current feeling, and kind of adapting to that. And I think any good therapist with some experience with people and has a good kind of sense of what the person needs in front of them can be very effective in this setting. I don't think it requires. That's why I think it can be expanded greatly, because I think there's a lot of people that are capable of guiding people through this and being supportive. So I think there's a huge expansion that's possible. I just don't know how financially and legally it's going to work. Right now, ketamine, because of the cost of the provider and the therapist and the time it takes, is very cost prohibitive, because you just have to pay for the space and the attention. And so I can't imagine an insurance company paying for that.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, these experiences are pretty limited right now to people that can afford it.
But the goal is to have them covered by insurance at some point.
Look,
at least get the cost down.
Yeah,
so that
my
more
goal is
can...
awareness, man. My goal is people to be aware of it, because I don't know what the future holds. I honestly don't think anyone really knows what's going to happen in the next few years with all of this stuff. Whether it just stays as like, hey, there's some ketamine clinics and now we have psilocybin and weed stores and that sort of thing, or if there's a real push for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. I don't know. I don't know how interested the system is on healing a lot of people and making them feel great. I worry that just like the food and drug system of, disease processes like diabetes and heart disease, there's zero effort put into stopping diseases in their tracks or curing them. The effort is to maintain a certain level of disease that keeps someone in the healthcare system, keeps someone taking medications, but they don't die right away. Right. They die slowly. That's the diabetes management in America, is keep someone at an A1C of 7, which will sure enough slowly kill them, but it won't acutely kill them.
What is A1C?
A1C is a 3-month measure of your blood sugar, and it's what we use to measure blood sugar averages. So, like, since it came up, like, this recently, like, completely, I was irate. I was just irate. So one of my friend's moms went to Kaiser, And she came to me feeling really bad, and I looked at the numbers, and she was told, you don't have a sugar problem. Your sugar's fine. Her A1C was 6.7. Type 2 diabetes is diagnosed at 6.5. That means your average blood sugar is like 130, 140, right?
Yeah.
They didn't put her on diabetes drugs. They said, this is fine. And in Kaiser's system, anything below 7 is considered normal.
Really?
Because the guidelines say that a type 2, this is why though, this is how screwed up this is. The guidelines say that a type 2 diabetic is controlled if their A1C is less than 7. That's insane.
Yeah.
A normal blood sugar average should be like 5.5 or less, 5.7 or less, something like that. I aggressively intervene with like lifestyle and even meds at 5.7, 5.8, and 5.9. And over here, this company is taking care of millions and millions of Americans. And if you're type 2 diabetic, your kidneys, your eyes, your nerves are all being destroyed by the toxicity of the sugar. And they're like, it's fine, but your cholesterol is 5 points above normal. You need a cholesterol drug. Those cholesterol drugs, not a lot of good research to suggest a lot of benefit, and they just keep pumping them. They just keep that whole statin debacle is a huge mess. It is way overprescribed. It is manipulated. If anyone, look, we're here to talk.
Statin is the drug about
cholesterol.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to really dive deep, there's an amazing book by Dr. John Abramson called Sickening. Came out last year, maybe even this year. It just came out. Read it. It is incredible. It's incredible. He goes into a bunch of different examples. The story about insulin, how everyone's taking insulin and jacking up the prices and how it's not necessary. That chapter alone.
Yeah, isn't the price like crazy cheaper in Canada or something like that?
No, like there's a big story, but look, we have NPH insulin, which the evidence suggests is just as good as the new insulin, and it's like $5. But everyone, including myself, was trained to use these new expensive insulins. And the only reason why is because they're new and expensive. And ever since and there's these comparative studies that suggest it's all the same, but they don't talk about those comparative studies because my job, what I was trained to do is make money for drug companies. So I was trained to dose Glargine long-acting insulin and Lispro short-acting insulin and inject 5 times a day or 4 times a day. That's how I was trained. That's not the only way to manage insulin. It's the most lucrative way to manage insulin. And
you were literally trained to make drug companies money. That's fucking nuts, dude.
Totally. That is exactly what I'm trained to do.
That's so wild.
All the doctors.
And it's still that way.
And if you read the book, you'll find out that actually as I was entering the healthcare space in the early 2000s, that's when it ramped up. That's when... So the whole story is evidence. There's a recent article too. Evidence-based medicine has been like hijacked, and it has. In the 90s... And before, like, it was like, I don't want to misquote the book, but it was like a very, like, not as significant a proportion of the research was driven by drug companies. And there was a lot of federally backed research and private, and you can make studies. Now, after the 2000s, like, I think it's 90% of all research on medicines and therapies are funded by drug companies.
Yeah.
Which means they own everything. And by the way, and they get into it and people are talking about it now, when they get approved by the FDA, they do not have to deliver the raw data. The FDA reviews the data that they have already chopped up, parsed out, and deleted what doesn't work for them, and they present that. That's the only data that the FDA gets. So evidence-based medicine, the way when it was coming up as the new model of teaching doctors in the 90s, is completely hijacked. So instead of coming to the practice in the 90s and giving doctors money and trips and stuff to promote their drugs, instead they just bought everything else out, and the only drugs that are approved are their drugs. So either way, so we got rid of
There's like a villain in a Batman movie.
I think the drug look, they're just a business, though. When the government gives you free reign to do what you want. In 1970, so we were making vaccines, okay? There was a lot of problem with vaccines. We had some really amazing vaccines that transformed the world. I'm not talking about the COVID vaccine. Not talking.
No, it's okay.
That.
Since you said the word vaccine, this entire episode will be taken off of YouTube.
This has nothing to do with the COVID vaccine. Just so we're clear, I'm just giving another example of the dominant power of the drug companies.
Yeah.
So before they started making vaccines, and they were getting sued a lot because of side effects, especially with peds. So they were like, I'm out. And this is all in the book.
Peds is
Pediatrics.
Pediatrics.
Kids. And they were like, we're out. We're not going to make these. We can't get sued. So what did they? They passed a law. I think it was 1970 or maybe it was 1980. I think it was 1980. And they basically, gosh, I'd love to look it up. I think 70 or 80. I don't know why I'm brain farting it. Whatever. I think it was 1980. Basically saying that you can't sue them. You can't sue them for a side effect from a childhood vaccine. Since that time, the number of childhood vaccines skyrocketed, and you cannot sue them for a side effect to the childhood vaccine. And it transformed the landscape, and you couldn't.
I can't find it. No, I need a young Jamie.
We need a young Jamie.
We need a young Jamie. But it's still like that today. I mean, didn't Pfizer and Moderna say you can't sue them for?
So that was
that's
specific
for any vaccine.
No, that was specific to the jab.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you'll know what to type in more than I will. That's nuts. They said if something bad happens when your kid gets this shot, you're not allowed to sue us.
1981. It's called the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act.
Oh, yeah. I have heard of that.
Of course you have.
Yeah. I've only heard of it within the past 2 years, of course.
Right. Because this became a whole issue. National vaccine created. It provides compensation to people found to be injured by certain vaccines. So the government will compensate for the injuries because you cannot sue the drug company.
That's
so
crazy.
So the government bailed out the drug companies so that the drug companies would continue to make vaccines for children.
And why would the government?
Because imagine suing the government is much more difficult for a vaccine injury than suing the drug company. Good luck suing the government.
Right. So then so
what happened was there's just no, and then anytime anyone said that my child was injured by a vaccine, so they were called crazy anti-vaxxers.
The government and the pharmaceutical company creating the vaccine, both of them wanted everybody to get vaccinated, and neither of them wanted anyone to sue for bad shit that happened.
So the government bailed out the vaccine companies. I hate that we're talking about this.
That's okay, though.
We're going to get censored, dude.
Probably.
This is like such a hot button thing.
It's a hot button thing, and obviously there's more to talk about within outside of a 2-hour podcast. But
yeah.
So how does that play today then? So today, does that context map itself with you not being allowed to sue pharmaceutical companies for things other than vaccines too, like prescribed medicines? Does the government still have this workaround where they're working with pharmaceutical companies?
They just protect that. Well, so first of all, the government agency that regulates them is paid for by them. So that's it.
There's already
end of conversation. The FDA is paid for by the companies that they're supposed to regulate. So game over. That doesn't work. So it's. I was trying to use these examples of how flawed the system is and how it really has no interest in people's health. It has interest in making money for organizations. I think the pandemic showed us very clearly that our public health system has zero interest in anything but making money, and they will take any opportunity to make money, and they don't care about the side effects. They don't care about what happens to people's mental. In fact, it's good for them because they'll have more work for them to manage and more, things to implement for mental health programs. There's no interest in human health. The interest is in making money. And this part of the conversation started with the book, and I cannot do justice to the message that Dr. Abramson puts out in that book. It's all very clear, and it's all very not conspiracy. It's all just here's what happened. Mm-hmm. And it's sad. And it really put us down this path. And I'm here talking about mental health and psychedelics because it's the only useful tool that I see that's new and that's been presented. And just like my food stuff, it's not new. It's old. It's us going back to the past and being like, well, we weren't this screwed up thousands of years ago. We died from broken arms and infection, like a little cut on your arm would kill you. So again, it's not this black and white thing. Oh, Western medicine and drug companies are all bad. That's not the point. it's not about polarizing or taking a political position. There is none of that in this conversation. We evolved to be the dominant species on this planet over hundreds of thousands, probably millions of years if you go back to pre-Homo sapien ancestors. We evolved to be the dominant species on this planet. We were not these like barbaric cavemen that just died at 35 and just were gross and barbaric and beat each other up. That's like not true. And probably if you listen to guys like Graham Hancock, there's been a lot longer history of human societies that have just been wiped away by cataclysmic events. Super fun thing to talk about. Which
Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. Watch it.
Or just listen to everything Graham Hancock says, because
Yeah.
whether or not you believe him, it's fucking cool.
It's crazy.
It's so fun.
Yeah.
But my point is like we have we're so far away from like what made us who we are that we don't even know like what it looks like to like eat normal food. Right. We're over here. We spent 2 other podcasts talking about eating meat. Mm-hmm. The hell is everyone talking about? Yeah. there is no human being without meat.
Yeah.
There is no human being without animals dying. Like, you can't just make everything a little sexy topic. Oh, we now have PETA organization. We have to pander to them because they're afraid for every animal. Go fuck yourselves. Like, no, it's not consistent with real world.
Right.
And I feel like it's important for our leaders to emphasize reality. But then it could get really weird and you're like, yeah, but aren't we all going into the virtual world and there is no more reality? And I actually think it's even more important as we get more digital. Becoming digital and becoming more in that space, it does not mean everything has to become worse. It actually means there's more information, there's more opportunities for education, there's more opportunity for people like a therapist. We could have been in this environment. There could be a therapist digitally talking to us and we could be sharing a psychedelic experience and there's a therapist.
We'll do that for the next episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's like a million versions of a healthier world than the bullshit that we're offering people now. So to me, psychedelic therapy, marijuana, psilocybin, ketamine, these are like powerful, essential tools that we have used for hundreds of thousands of years, and we need to bring them back. I'm not here to explain the solution of how to do that. I'm here to be it just makes sense.
I think I have a fucking solution, dude. Dose everybody. Dose them all.
Timothy Leary tried that, bro. And that's what happened with the drug war.
Yeah.
That whole, I know you're joking.
Tune in,
well, the problem is they got too laissez-faire. If you dose people with acid and they freak out, well, now you give the government and the media a really easy story to vilify this stuff.
Sure.
So, I know you're joking. You're a comedian after all.
But when I say dose people, like, yes, I want to sneak into every politician's bedroom at night and dose the water by their bed with LSD.
Doing it.
No chance. No fucking chance. There's no way politicians are doing psychedelics besides a couple, like Bernie, maybe. Fucking Mitch McConnell, that old ancient turtle, he's never touched anything.
I don't know.
There's no chance.
They're actors.
They're actors on a political stage, yes, but because they're actors on that political stage, I don't think they have the ability to transform the way they think, because they need to commit to the bit. They need to commit to, I'm on this side and that side's bad and here's why, and the election was stolen and vaccines are the way to go, and all the things that they have to fucking fight for. And sometimes I do a bit on stage where I talk about how I want everybody in the world to do mushrooms at the same time, because it would turn the planet into an 8 billion person Burning Man tent, and I would love that. But I do, and that's the joke part of it. But the serious part of it is I do wonder sometimes if the people who are leading the charge at Big Pharma and the people who are sitting in the Senate and fucking AOC and Don Jr., if all of these people had a therapy session or did a hero's dose of mushrooms, how different would the operations be in congressional meetings, in the Senate, in all these places, on the debate stage? Half the fucking debate would be a heart-to-heart. You know what I mean?
Imagine if they did a debate and took a microdose of MDMA.
That's what, that'd be insane.
I love you, bro. Let's do this together.
Bro, you're right, dude. We should be working together, dude. States are different, and that's fine. Like Trump doing MDMA, that'd be incredible. Biden doing mushrooms.
Trump's done everything. I think Trump's a real dude.
I don't think so. I don't think so because his brother was an alcoholic. And he said he's been sober for like decades and decades and decades.
Maybe.
I think he did cocaine in the 80s off of strippers' asses.
Like everyone
for
did.
sure. Yeah, he snorted coke out of a butthole for sure. And I applaud him for that. But I don't think he really fucked around with other stuff.
Yeah. Well,
and I think if we did, we would be able to like see it. Like
it's those ego drugs, the alcohol and the cocaine and the stimulants.
That's
like
what I think a lot of these people have done over the years. Maybe not in recent years, but it's the ego destroying medicines that I think need to start peppering into upper levels of society, into those, the political space and the law, the shot callers, the change makers, the law people, all that kind of stuff.
Here's a fun thought. Like, okay, so making a distinction between the ego building drugs, the stimulants, the cocaines, the alcohol, the nicotines too, they make you feel all like, oh, I'm the man, right?
Yeah.
Those are not really healing. They're super fun, I guess. They can make you productive. Let's not pretend that they can't. They can. There's like benefits to them, but generally are not like about healing your emotions and making you more spiritually present, right? But the 4 drugs that we talk about now, I'm just going to present the 4 that I think are really interesting.
And then I'll present the 19 that I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other. No, there's so many others, but
Yeah.
I want to present some kind of content I think that is interesting to me. So there's 4 drugs that I think are really, really popular and people should think about and at least have an understanding of those as the whole psychedelic space opens up. So mushrooms, MDMA, ketamine, and LSD. Like those are like probably the 4 most common, most popular, most prevalent for sure. So everyone knows someone who's tried.
It's a bit more out of reach for an ibogaine or a 5-MeO-DMT.
Exactly. Okay. Or even ayahuasca. I think those are like definitely
those are
just
the mothers, for sure.
Those are just right. And those other drugs, I just don't want to poop with those. Just as interesting, just as powerful.
Oh yeah.
Very
even
good.
more so.
But like I'm always trying to hit people that are listening because I'm like a general medicine doctor and I talk to the general population. So most people are not going to know about those drugs, but they will know about the 4 that I just mentioned.
Cool. Name them again.
Again, psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, MDMA, which we called ecstasy in the 90s and 2000s, ketamine, which was vilified as the K-hole, but like most people's kids, if they've been to the emergency room, have had a dose of ketamine if they've been in that situation. And then LSD, which we haven't talked about that much, but is an important drug nonetheless, because it kind of opened the door to a lot of this when Hoffman discovered it in the 50s.
Yeah.
Amazing story. I'm sure you had someone else talk about it. And
I haven't,
the bike
but
ride.
we can. Can I
you
do it?
Do it. I love
you
it.
Fix it. And then
no,
you fix it.
You got it.
He was in his lab. So this is what I know. And then this is going to be spotty.
It's good.
So he was in his lab. He urban legend is that he got some of it on his hand as he was creating the compound and messing with different things. Took a bike ride home, tripped balls on the bike ride, came back the next day. He had this euphoric, amazing, incredible experience. Came back the next day, synthesized it again, did a much lower dose, discovered that it could potentially have some type of use, had no idea what that use would be for. And so the lab that he was working with had him and other doctors or chemists synthesize it even more. And then they mailed it all over the US and I think Europe and other places too. They mailed free acid to all these
without anyone knowing what it is.
Yeah, without anyone knowing what it was. It wasn't acid yet. And they mailed it all over the place saying like, hey, what should we use this for? Kind of. That was like the general theory. Like what can be the practical use for this? And it got to the US and obviously leaked out of the medical community into society. And that's when it started getting a foothold in culture and being used bit by bit for personal use. And then that led us into the 60s and the anti-war movement and the activist movement. And then that is when Nixon realized, oh shit, all these hippies aren't going to go fight in the war. And we need people to go win this war because I have a huge dick and I need to prove it. So I'm going to call a war on drugs. Was that a pretty good?
That was pretty good.
Summation? I feel like that was pretty good. It was like probably 70%.
70% of it.
Okay.
I'll just throw in some like fun things.
Please.
He was researching some kind of medical stuff. It was like very traditional. He was like, like heart disease or like it's like he was looking at a drug for something very, very like real medical research is what he was doing.
Okay.
And he accidentally got a drop, but it was like 5 or 10 times the dose.
Yeah, it was
that
like a ridiculous
it was like a ridiculous dose.
amount.
So he did the bike ride, and then he like started playing with it.
He rode his bike home. And,
rode his bike home. So all that stuff is good. So that was just a funny thing.
He was Dutch. This was in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
right?
and then it got out to the States. The other like fun story about it and is that like the government was using it to do research as a truth serum. And
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra. So that I just wanted to.
Yep, definitely.
We're not going to like do all that because that's been talked about on a million podcasts.
Sure.
But like, look, the story of acid is all very, very interesting.
It's
and
wild.
The government was very involved. And like the Unabomber was one of the test subjects. So like they wackadoodled a bunch of people.
And Charles Manson,
famously.
Yeah.
So like acid is very powerful. Of all those 4 drugs, is the most overwhelming and powerful, and no novice should do it. And it's very not one that I would bring into the quote unquote medical space. I do think there's a role for it though, especially for psychonauts and people really seeking certain truths. And I do think it should be legal and available to people, not sold on the street in a store, because it's way too powerful for that. But I just don't think that magical experience, that transformative experience, should be like illegal and said that it's like something so scary, because it's not. And you can do acid and not lose your mind. But like if the government loads you up on acid and shows you crazy pictures and makes you a freaking killer, that's like a real thing, and that's a real story, and our government really did that. And that's
MK Ultra, look it up.
Yeah, it's not like a secret anymore.
It's not a conspiracy.
So like when you hear about like, oh my God, is it possible that the government is in cahoots with the pharmaceutical industry and all that stuff Dr. Gary's saying is true? Of course it is.
Yeah.
It's not like even weird. It's not even weird. The government like does this all the time. So when I, said stuff about like the recent medical situation in America, it's not really like that crazy to suggest that they're just winging it when they make up rules. Okay. I'm not going to go into that. All right. Back to the 4 drugs.
Okay. So we have these 4 medicines that the drug. It's funny to call them medicines and drugs. Like sometimes I'll call drugs medicines, and my friends from home will be like, bro, are you tripping right now? And I'm like, nah, dude, you need to evolve. So we have psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, and LSD. And why have you identified these 4?
Because they're available. Because they're
the most readily available.
They're readily
easiest
available.
to get.
They're popular. And they're not so like with ayahuasca and ibogaine, they can be very, very unpleasant, right? Like the actual the side effects are quite unpleasant. These are not that. That's why they've been used so much recreationally. So I think it's important, if you're going to like take or promote these kind of drugs, like if you have an option to do an ayahuasca retreat where you're going to vomit for hours and hours, and there's a huge role for that, but you can also just do some ketamine and have a similar experience. Like at least I would try the ketamine first, because like you don't need to vomit and be like a hot mess. There's also a problem. So I'm just picking the 4 that I think that are the most popular, the most in the culture, the most used in a recreational state, and ultimately have like a very good side effect profile, so you can use them and not be a hot mess.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why those 4. Probably also personal experience. Like because I'm in the culture of the world in America right now, those are the drugs that are available. You can't really go pop an ibogaine on the street. Or like at a music festival or whatever.
Yeah.
When I say street, I don't mean some dude on the street. I mean like
home, personal space,
in like
whatever.
the world that we live. Okay, so I thought about these drugs as 4. There's 4 things that each of them provide in the most specific way. Like each of them provides something very special. And I think if you think about them in that way, that's how I would then in the future hopefully be able to say like this would be good for you based on like what your goals are. So MDMA is love. Psilocybin is nature. Ketamine is answers. And LSD is questions. This is what they deliver to your mind. When you take LSD and you have this experience of synesthesia, and the whole world transforms to something that is not there, you have full vivid hallucinations. Colors, like something that is blue is no longer blue. Something that you hear, you can now see, or something that you see, you can now smell. That is a complete transformation of how you perceive this world. And you realize that you are just perceiving the world. What is really around you, you have no idea. You're just seeing what your eyes can process, what your ears can process. And then on top of that, your brain is filtering out like 80% of the information so that you can even have something you can wrap your brain around, you know? There's a lot of experience that you're having that your brain just filters out, right? Like your brain is a computer that takes in information and then just gives you what is relevant. So here's a drug that I can like say, well, what your brain thinks is relevant, we're going to change what it thinks is relevant. We're actually going to make new connections rapidly. We're going to change that whole sensorium experience. That creates questions. Mm-hmm. It really does. You ask yourself, what is that really? Or what do I really feel like? What is music? Is that wave really just a sound wave, or is it also like a visual wave or like an energy wave that I can feel? These questions come up, which really drove people to open their mind and expand their mind. And it really makes you question everything about the world, because you realize everything about the world is just a filter of your senses and then your brain senses. And then that's what you get. And like, you can have a completely different experiences. And perhaps if you grew up in a different environment and your brain's filters were different, you'd perceive different things. Now that is scary.
Yeah.
And that is why that drug is so vilified during the 60s. You made the joke about like these hippies will never go. Yeah, they're not going to go to war if they understand that the world that they're being presented with is very, very different than the reality. So asking questions, as I do as a doctor, as anyone who asks questions, that gets suppressed right away by anyone trying to control you. Hence why LSD, and then LSD also has a very, very, very long half-life. You are high for like 8 to 10 hours on it. So that's another challenge of that drug. It's also very, like once it's on, it's on. So if you're not experienced, you can freak out because there's no escape.
Yep.
So that's that. Ketamine is answers. Why is it answers? Because all it does is disassociate you. Most people are stuck in one way of thinking about something, or they cannot see past themselves or past the way they think. So the power of that drug is by letting you look at yourself in the third person. I always give this example of like, you're here. Imagine if your brain your mind kind of shifted to here. You're still here. But like you're looking at yourself operating, almost like you're controlling a video game that is yourself. Sure. People have described it in that way.
Yeah.
Like, so it's forget about the recreational fun part of that. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in the fact that it releases you from the way you're thinking, and you can now look and see, oh, there's the answer. Like for me,
kind of an out of body experience.
Kind of like when I finally discovered it and I was doing it, I actually did it in a very much a personal transformative way. And I would look to see parts of my life, and I would literally be able to have a conscious dream of like this thing that I'm thinking about would come across me, and if it didn't fit me, it was like obviously like bad, like this doesn't fit. And then I think about something else and it like really fit, or it felt right, and I could just clearly see the answer. There was no like, I like her, she's great, you know, like people struggle with the relationship, I should probably break up with her, but I don't know, blah blah blah. Well, when you go third person, you're like, no, that is a bad person for me, or like, dude, I'm being an asshole, that is a great person, I need to like work on that. Like that's what the third person dissociative state gives you. It gives you answers. I think that's the power of it in general. And then once you see those answers, you can actually change your mind because of that neurological neuroplasticity effect. MDMA, we actually kind of talked about the love, and that's why it's so powerful for
love,
trauma,
acceptance, heart opening,
empathy. Yeah. It's so important in a world with trauma, or in a world where we don't talk about our emotions so much. The vets are just a perfect example of it, where they don't have resources and they come back to a culture that doesn't talk about emotions and feelings, especially with men. And they have all of these hatred and fear and anger. And to be able to present like just a potent feeling of love and just like, by the way, you don't have to feel this way all the time. You can feel love again. That alone is curative healing power. And for so many people, that is what they need. And they don't need to do it every day. They just need to be able to know they can access that. And once you can access that feeling of love and your heart opens a little bit, you can find it there again sober. Or you could go on a run and find it. Or you could hold your partner's hand and find it. Or play with your dog and find it. And you see so many vets that are just shut down and they have these experiences, and then they can like build a relationship with a dog. And now they feel fulfilled because they have a meaningful relationship. That's love. That's like the most important human emotion maybe ever. Like of all of them, like love is what we want to anchor ourselves in. So that's why that drug is so important.
You know, they're trying to come up with a brand name for MDMA right now.
Yeah.
For when it releases, because they have to have one. You can't just call it MDMA. It's like putting water in a bottle and calling it water. It's like you can't do that.
Liquid
It's
death.
just what it is. So one of the names that I heard they pitched, but they're running it the way that they're coming up with a brand name for it. Rick Doblin said is they're running through like 7 crazy computers that are comparing the pitches for the brand name to every existing drug and product and brand and copywritten piece of language that exists. And if it's 70% or more similar, they can't use it.
Oh.
So their leading one that they ended up not being able to move forward with was Empath.
Oh, cool.
Kind of empath, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of cool, right? Because like some brand names for medicines are really cool and they make sense. Like Provigil it was originally for pilots to stay awake, and like so Pro and Vigil is just like makes sense. So I pitched him a couple.
What's your favorite?
The one that I pitched 2. One was Indeepen.
Oh.
Indeepen.
It sounds too sexual.
It's a little sexual.
Yeah.
But also MDMA can be kind of sexual sometimes. But I'm also not a fucking brand marketing guy. But Indeepen or what was the other one? In Deep. It was something about deep. Both of them were deep. So I guess both of them were sexual. But I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah,
that they're
that
trying to
just
come
shows where
up
your head
with
is
a
at
brand
with it.
name. It is, yeah. Kind of trying to come up with a brand name that matches. Anyways, psilocybin is the 4th.
Psilocybin is the 4th. It's probably the one why I think it's so important, because nature. So we have this world where we're super disconnected from our natural world. We mostly live in cities that are really weird. Most of us are online on our phones. We've just lost that connection to nature. So any drug that can reconnect to nature, and so it's the most obvious one, and it's why microdosing psilocybin makes so much sense, because you realize like you're in a natural world and like there's beauty in plants and there's beauty in the person in front of you. And so that also induces empathy to other people and opens your heart. So these aren't like isolated things, but it's just a good way to think about it. So someone who's really stuck indoors and really sad and like not connecting with the world, psilocybin's a great option. Someone who's really cut off emotionally and has been traumatized from like childhood, MDMA is a great option.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who is stuck in their decision making and stuck in their processes of life and can't figure out their next step, ketamine is a great option. And someone who wants to see what else is out there,
Curiosity,
and expand their consciousness for the sake of it and see what else they can think of, LSD is out there. So I think it's a really fun way to look at those 4 drugs. Obviously, it's not all encompassing, but it's palatable, and it makes sense with everyone's experiences of them. And remember, these drugs, the consistency of experience, it's not like if you do it and I do it, we have like magically different hallucinations. There's a reason why on acid, there's like the pictures that they drew in the 60s. Like that's what you experience. It's a very consistent, reproducible thing. So it's not really a hallucination. A hallucination is like a random thing you're thinking and seeing in your mind that's not there. But like the consistency of the experience really doesn't make it a hallucination. And that's why you think
it's a pattern that becomes established. Like I remember prior to dipping into the world of psychedelics and prior to my first LSD trip, which was a massive experience, I had seen, tapestries of sacred geometry patterns and geometric shapes and fractals and all these like this Mr. Rogers painting behind me. Shout out to Danny Stevens. All these other crazy like art and the way people would dress at a concert or a festival. And I would always be like, what the fuck? I don't understand that. And then first time doing LSD, I was like, oh my God, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I understand. It opens your perceptive ability to a whole new realm of design, color, and just stimulation that's coming
and
in.
What's out there in the world. I was always afraid of LSD. I was super sold on this, like it's going to ruin my brain. And I like love my brain. I like being able to think through things.
Brains are cool.
It's great. I love it.
Yeah.
But then like it kept coming up, and then this whole psychedelic movement. So I'm like, I got to try it. I really have to have an experience with it. And I was always like very guarded because I didn't want to have a bad experience, because psychedelics and drugs have, like I said, set and setting, controlled. So I was finally at an opportunity where we were at a music festival on the beach. Literally, we had a condo on the beach next to the music festival, and it's in a hangout music festival in Alabama. Highly recommend it. Gulf Shores, Alabama, like the best.
Cool.
Like on the White Sands Beach. So I'm like, all right, well, what a better place? If I don't have a good experience, I'm going to walk, 100 yards to my hotel and just sit there and be like, I'm never going to do this again, but like, let's try it. And one of my favorite bands was coming on, and I'm like, well, I got to do that traditional experience of like listening to like one of my favorite bands, because I'm a musician and I love music and like whatever. Mm-hmm. So I take it with my best buddy who had done it a bunch. So I'm telling this story because there were all these things I did to make sure I had a good experience, and that if anyone ever thinks about it, they should do those things. Make sure you're with an experienced person. Make sure you're setting settings right. Make sure you have a safety net to get out if you have to get out. Make sure you're really prepared for it. Have an intention of like what kind of experience you're looking for, whatever, just to rehash that.
Yeah.
Get out there on the beach. I'm like, I don't feel anything. It's great. Like, whatever. It's like nonsense. I'm not going to feel it. And I'm walking up, and it's AWOL Nation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they start playing, and I like look up, and the blue sky is red with blue lightning bolts. Like a totally different color than it was.
Yeah.
The sand has turned purple, like full like purple. And I'm like, they're playing their song, and I can see the sound waves pulsating out of the speakers.
Yeah.
And they're changing colors, sort of mixing with the colors. And I'm like, and my first thought, because I was ready for it, I wasn't like scared or anything. And my first thought is like, damn, all those stupid pictures from the 1960s. This is really what it looks like. It just looks like that.
Yeah,
they were just painting what they saw. And I'm like, I always thought it was so stupid and cliche. And I'm like the Jimi Hendrix pictures. I'm like, no, like that's what they were seeing. Mm-hmm. And it was so powerful. Like that album and that band, I'm like now like attached to because of that experience. And my buddy who like shared it with me, it was also special, but it did not stop. It went on for 8 hours. There was many other bands we saw.
Yeah.
I was exhausted by the end of it. I've only done it three times. I don't recommend doing it a ton, but it was like eye-opening and magical and special, like very, very special. I feel like grateful for that experience, like blessed to be in an environment with friends where I can do it safely and like have that kind of, because people have bad experiences too.
Yeah.
I could see like in a heartbeat how it could go bad.
Oh, for sure. Set and setting is huge.
Yeah.
That's always toward the top of my priority list, at the top of my priority list whenever I'm going to experience something like a psychedelic. Dude, we hit 2 hours.
Amazing.
You feel good?
I feel great. How do you feel?
I feel great, dude. I love you so much.
I love you, bro.
I think we gotta wrap it up because I got a shoot starting a little later today, which is gonna be about mushrooms.
Yay.
Actually, we're gonna shoot this. It'll come out by the time this episode comes out, so it's gonna be a dubstep track, a music video about the whole story of how Santa is based on shamans.
Oh, I love it.
And mushrooms. Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. Yeah.
Do it.
Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about? Because we can do this all again. Also,
we could. I love talking to you. I don't know. I just wanted to share this.
I love the perspective, especially from somebody who is so, or at least has been so in the system.
Right.
And you have such a unique perspective, and to have the ability to put your brain outside of that system in this experience and start talking about things that aren't talked about a lot within the Western medical training space, I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
And it's very important.
I just want people to, I was so scared to do this podcast in general, but I'm like, it's just such a positive and special part of my life.
Yeah.
And everyone in my life knows it. And now it's becoming apparent to many people. I can't imagine just being like tight-lipped about it, because it's like, there's so much there that can help millions of people. And there's so much in our history that suggests that it has helped us get to where we are, that I cannot live in fear. I have to at least share some fun stories and a perspective that is, I don't think, all that unique. I think there's a lot of people that think this way, and there's probably a lot more doctors than I even think. We're taught to be afraid, to protect, to guard, to...
You're taught to keep the volume of that thinking down.
Yeah.
And the volume is slowly but surely getting raised, for sure.
And I just want to be a part of it. And when I heard you were doing this series, I'm like, fuck yeah, do it. Whatever I can do to support and
Hell yeah.
Keep it up, dude.
I love you so much,
I
bro.
love you, bro.
Dr. Bro.
Dr. Bro.
Air hug. We love you. All right, everybody. Oh, wait. Before we leave, where can people find your stuff?
I'm just on Instagram at drgaryevolve. Been a lot less active, but you can always reach out to me there. And if you want to check out my practice, learn about the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, it's at evolvehealthcare.com.
Cool. And I'll say all that in the beginning as well. Right on. Love you so much, bro. See you, everybody. And that's it. Thanks so much to Dr. Gary for cruising by and blessing us with his vibrations. And thank you to you for receiving those vibrations. Check out more at Dr. Gary Evolve on Instagram. You can also check out evolvehealthcare.com to take a look at more of what Dr. Gary does. Who knows? Maybe he'll become your doctor and you'll become his patient. And then you mention me and he'll say, wow, really? You know Brent? And you say, yeah. Does that mean I get a discount? And he says, no. That means you actually have to pay more. So the choice is yours. Guys, check out the Good Trip Instagram at Good Trip Podcast on Instagram for weekly clips and more. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe and rate and share. Do all the things on the Spotify and the iTunes. You have no idea how much that helps. It's ridiculous. But please do it. And I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you all. And I hope you have a wonderful week. Go drink more water, please. You're probably dehydrated. Peace.